Next from Springfield, Ralp Martire, the executive director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, reacts to Governor Rauner's budget address. This runs about 7 minutes.
Ralp Martire, thanks for joining us. You just heard the governor's second budget address. What's your reaction?
Well, I mean, there's some nuances from the first time around, but generally the message is pretty similar. It's that his main focus is his turnaround agenda, and he really wants the Democrats to compromise with him on that. And if they're willing to compromise on his turnaround agenda, he made it explicit that he'd be willing to talk about revenue, but only in that instance, right? And I don't think that that is substantially different from where the governor was over the last year, and we weren't able to break through that stalemate. He did break out education pretty clearly from the rest of the budget, and a couple of things about his breaking about of education could be good or could be damaging to a final agreement. I mean, obviously, if education gets funded, and we're talking education as K-12 and early childhood, but there's still nothing on the table for higher ed, that's a major problem, and it really won't fly well. If education gets funded, but it's at the cost of cutting social services dramatically, that won't fly well, and that'll create some controversy. So in that respect, isolating out education could have some unintended negative consequences on the negotiation of a final budget deal. On the positive side, he indicated that the existing school funding formula is inadequate, and it truly is. He indicated that we needed a bipartisan resolution to it, and we truly do. And he indicated that that resolution had to be one where no school district had its money taken away to fund another, which is exactly right from both a good policy and a good political standpoint. So on the reform of the formula itself, that was a very hopeful change and something that the state of Illinois sorely needs. In fact, even using our current outdated formula based on our own analysis, the state's own analysis performed by the Education Funding Advisory Board, our level of funding for schools is woefully inadequate. It's $4 billion inadequate. If we used a more accurate evidence-based model that ties school funding to those educational practices that have a statistically meaningful correlation to enhancing student achievement over time, we're more like $5 billion out of whack. So net, that formula needs some fixing, and it needs some additional investment. Now, the one repeated message is somehow the governor tried to tie the temporary tax increase to the downgrading of the state's bonds. Said, we increased our taxes and still were downgraded 5 times. What should be noted is that in every one of the instances where we were downgraded, the one positive the rating agencies indicated was a new revenue. So that was not the cause of the downgrade. In fact, it was something that prevented us from getting a further downgrade. It was actually a positive. The second, he tries to tie some of the economic downturn to the tax increase, and that's just not accurate. If you look at Illinois' performance coming out of the Great Recession, it's very similar to its performance coming out of other recessions. Illinois always lags the rest of the nation in its recovery. Our lag in this period of time was very similar. And in fact, Illinois falling behind the rest of the national economy, that was going on before the temporary tax increase and at the same rate. And more recently, when the temporary tax increase was still in the last year of it, we actually outperformed the rest of the nation. So these connections that a lot of individuals try to make, including the governor, that are sort of anti-tax in the world view, these connections between tax policy, tax increases, and economic harm really don't hold up to scrutiny.
We won't keep you much longer. We had a 5% tax increase. It went off a year ago, January, I believe. Seems almost like 2 years ago, but a year ago, January. You had argued that that did not make us uncompetitive with other surrounding states in the Midwest. What would you say, with the revenue needs of the state, should be the state income tax? What level of taxation should we have it?
Well, in a perfect world, we'd have a graduated rate, right, with a higher tax rate on higher levels of income and lower rate on lower levels of income, but we don't live in a perfect world. We live in Illinois, and so we have a constitution that requires a flat tax. That said, I think Illinois could solve a lot of its revenue problems if we bumped up our rate from 3.75%, where it currently is, to 4.75. We don't even have to go back to the full 5. We should add a little bit of retirement income into the base, phase out the deduction for people with $50,000 a year in income or more, so you don't harm any low-income seniors at all, and phase the deduction out. It shouldn't be, you know, at $50,000 or less, your retirement income is exempt. At $50,001, it's all taxable. So you need to phase that exemption out. That's a rational thing to do. And then one thing the governor himself has put on the table is expanding the sales tax base to include services. As long as you focus it on consumer services, that would just modernize our system. Net, we need to generate about $7 billion in new revenue, which sounds like a lot of money, but our state economy is $745 billion. It's less than 1% of our economic activity. It's not even measurable. It's so small in context as to whether or not it could do economic harm. So that's something for people to think about. We have a large state with significant capacity. Problem is we have a bankrupt state government. The final reform, and it's interesting to hear that Governor Rauner says he's willing to just live with whatever pension reform language Senate President Cullerton wants to put on the table. That's all well and good. But you still can't deal with our state's unfunded pension liability constitutionally unless we re-amortize the debt we owe that system and flatten it out so we don't have this ever spiking, ever growing payment structure that we currently have. That's what's killing the system. And it's really not about benefits. I know the governor mentioned unaffordable benefits. Really, benefits aren't the driver of this problem. It's the debt that the state has borrowed for generations, which the governor did acknowledge today. And that borrowing, people need to understand, was used to subsidize the cost of service delivery for generations. And with 9 out of $10 going to education, health, social services, and public safety, everyone benefited from that borrowing in Illinois. Now we just need to find a rational way to pay it back.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Terry.